Washington, and we are coming on the air as special counsel Jack Smith is delivering remarks on the indictment of former President Donald Trump any moment. This is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell here in Washington, and we are coming on the air as special counsel Jack Smith is delivering remarks on the indictment of former President Donald Trump any moment from now. Just over an hour and a half ago, the 38-count indictment was unsealed, 37 of them specifically targeting Mr. Trump. And the accusations made in this indictment are stunning. They allege that the National Archives repeatedly demanded that the former president turn over classified documents beginning in May of 2021. The charges against the former president include willful retention of national defense information, conspiracy to obstruct justice, withholding a document or record, corruptly concealing a document or record, and concealing a document in a federal investigation, scheme to conceal, and false statements and representations.
This is Nathan Cross with American Daily News, and we need to talk about something that happened on December 2nd that perfectly captures where we are right now. The cameras were rolling, the cabinet was assembled, and 79-year-old President Donald Trump, after spending years mocking Joe Biden as Sleepy Joe, after repeatedly saying you would never catch him falling asleep on camera, did exactly that, multiple times, for nearly 6 minutes. While his own cabinet members praised him, the footage is verified. Snopes confirmed it. The Washington Post analyzed multiple video feeds. CNN played the clips. And the White House press secretary refused to directly answer whether it happened, instead saying Trump was, quote, listening attentively during what she called a marathon 3-hour meeting. But here's what makes this story so much more than just an embarrassing moment caught on camera. This is about standards. This is about hypocrisy at a scale that would end careers in any other context. And this is about questions nobody wants to ask, but everyone is starting to notice. Let me walk you through exactly what happened on that Tuesday afternoon, December 2nd, just after noon Eastern Time. Trump opens the cabinet meeting with his usual reference to sleepy Joe Biden. He then launches into a defense of his own sharpness, telling reporters that he's sharper than he was 25 years ago. He criticizes the New York Times for a detailed story about how the 79-year-old president appears to have slowed down during his second term. He calls reporters crazy for questioning his stamina. Then, over the next hour and a half, as his cabinet takes turns offering praise, Trump's eyes close. His head drops. He struggles visibly to stay awake. The Washington Post counted 9 separate instances where his eyes were closed for extended periods. Nearly 6 minutes total over roughly 75 minutes of footage. That's not a quick blink. That's not resting your eyes for a second. That's genuine drowsiness captured on multiple camera angles with no way to dispute what viewers are seeing. And it gets worse, because this wasn't a one-time thing. On December 8th, just 6 days later, it happened again. Trump was announcing a $12 billion bailout for farmers hurt by his own tariff policies. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins is explaining the package. And there he is, head tilting forward, eyes shutting, the unmistakable moment where someone jolts themselves back awake after starting to drift off. So we're not talking about a weird angle or a misleading freeze frame. We're talking about a documented pattern in the span of 1 week. 2 separate events. Multiple instances per event. All on camera. All impossible to explain away. Now here's where the story shifts from embarrassing to genuinely problematic. Because Donald Trump built an entire political brand around mocking this exact behavior in Joe Biden. We're not speculating. We have the receipts. In 2021, after Biden appeared to fall asleep at a climate conference in Scotland, Trump sent out an email blast saying, and I'm quoting directly, "Nobody that has true enthusiasm and belief in a subject will ever fall asleep." Think about that standard for a second. According to Trump's own words, falling asleep during an event means you lack enthusiasm. It means you don't believe in what you're doing. It signals disengagement. That was Trump's explicit argument against Biden. He repeated this attack throughout 2022 and 2023. After Biden's State of the Union, in early 2024, Trump said most of the time Biden looks like he's falling asleep. In June 2024, just before Biden's disastrous debate performance, Trump said Biden falls asleep at every single event. By late in the 2024 campaign, Trump was fixated on Biden falling asleep on a beach. He brought it up constantly. He seemed genuinely offended by it. "How do you fall asleep when cameras are raging?" Trump asked during a September 2024 rally. He told podcast host Andrew Schultz that same month, quote, "You'll never see me sleeping in front of the camera. That's a direct promise, an explicit commitment. And it was made just over a year ago. So when Trump closes his eyes for extended periods during his own cabinet meeting, when he visibly fights sleep while his secretaries praise him, when he tilts his head and jolts himself awake during a foreign policy roundtable, we're not witnessing a random occurrence. We're watching Trump fail to meet the exact standard he used as a weapon against his predecessor. This is exactly the kind of analysis you need if you want to understand what's really happening beyond the headlines. If that matters to you, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss when we break down the next development. Because what comes next digs into why this isn't just about one tired president. The White House response to all of this has been telling. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked directly whether Trump repeatedly dozed off during the December 2nd cabinet meeting. She didn't answer that question. Instead, she pivoted to saying Trump was listening attentively and running the entire 3-hour marathon cabinet meeting. Notice what she's doing there. She's reframing endurance as proof of engagement. But that doesn't address what the cameras captured. Multiple news organizations reviewed the footage independently. They all came to similar conclusions. The New York Times described Trump as appearing to fight sleep. People magazine reported him struggling to stay awake. The New Republic went further, stating he repeatedly falls asleep in his own cabinet meeting. These are not opinion outlets with axes to grind. These are legacy newsrooms with fact-checking standards, reviewing publicly available video. And what they're documenting lines up with what anyone watching the footage can see. Trump's eyes fully close, his posture shifts. There are moments where his head begins to drop before he catches himself. At one point, during the December 8th event, you can actually see the jolt, that physical snap back to alertness that happens when someone realizes they started drifting off. That's not interpretation, that's observable behavior on tape. So let's address the elephant in the room. Age and cognitive fitness. This is not an easy conversation, but it's a necessary one because Trump himself made it central to political discourse. He spent years arguing that Biden's age disqualified him from office. He questioned Biden's mental acuity constantly. He used Biden's occasional stumbles, his slower speech patterns, his moments of apparent confusion as evidence that Biden was unfit to serve. And voters responded to that argument. Exit polls showed concerns about Biden's age were a significant factor in the 2024 election. Democrats eventually pushed Biden aside, partly because those concerns became impossible to ignore after the debate disaster. Trump won that fight. He successfully made age and fitness a defining issue, but winning that fight means he's now subject to the same scrutiny. Trump turned 79 years old in June 2025. He is currently the oldest person to serve as president during their term in office. Biden was older when he left, but Trump holds the record for oldest at inauguration for a second term and will surpass Biden's age record if he completes this term. That's not a partisan attack. That's arithmetic. And while chronological age alone doesn't determine capability, visible signs of aging while in office matter because Trump argued they should matter. He set the standard. He can't now claim the standard doesn't apply to him, but there's another layer here that goes beyond simple fairness or hypocrisy. There are genuine questions about transparency and health disclosure. During Trump's first term, his doctor released a letter claiming Trump would be the healthiest individual ever elected to the presidency. That doctor later admitted Trump dictated that entire letter. It wasn't an independent medical assessment. It was Trump writing his own health report. Throughout both of his terms, Trump has resisted full disclosure about his medical visits. When he had an MRI in October 2025, he initially claimed he didn't even know what body part it was conducted on. The White House eventually released a summary after pressure, but it wasn't a complete medical record. It was a curated snapshot. Compare that to the level of scrutiny Biden faced. Every stumble was analyzed. Every verbal slip was dissected. His medical reports were pored over. Neurologists weighed in on cable news about whether specific behaviors indicated cognitive decline. And Trump encouraged all of that. He amplified it. He made it a centerpiece of his campaign. So when Trump now exhibits behavior that raises similar questions, behavior that includes falling asleep during official duties, it's entirely reasonable to ask for the same level of transparency and examination. This isn't about attacking Trump for being older. This is about applying the standards Trump insisted were essential for presidential fitness. Now let's talk about what this means politically. Because while the footage is embarrassing and the hypocrisy is glaring, the real impact is about governance and perception. Trump is trying to run a second term while dealing with multiple legal battles, international crises, domestic policy fights, and a razor-thin congressional majority. Every day that gets consumed by questions about his fitness is a day his administration isn't advancing its agenda. Every clip of him appearing to doze off during meetings becomes fodder for late-night shows, social media mockery, and opposition attack ads. And unlike some controversies that fade after a news cycle, this one has staying power because it's visual and it keeps happening. Remember, December 2nd wasn't an isolated incident. December 8th proved it's a pattern. And once a pattern is established, every future public appearance gets scrutinized for signs of fatigue. Every long meeting becomes a potential minefield. Every time Trump sits down for an extended event, cameras will be watching for closed eyes and dropped heads. That's not speculation. That's how political narratives work once they take hold. Biden never escaped the Sleepy Joe label once Trump successfully attached it. And now Trump is facing the exact same problem he created for his opponent. Republicans are starting to notice. They're not saying it loudly yet, but the concern is there. When you have a president who can't stay awake during his own cabinet meetings, it raises questions about scheduling, about workload, about whether key decisions are being made when the president is at full capacity. Trump has long prided himself on keeping an intense schedule. He mocks politicians who take time off. He presents himself as a high-energy leader who never stops working. But if that schedule is now causing visible exhaustion during critical meetings, then something has to give. Either the schedule gets scaled back, which contradicts Trump's brand, or the exhaustion continues to show up on camera, which feeds the narrative he can't handle it. Democrats are already weaponizing this. Not officially yet, but it's coming. The clips are being saved. The contrasts are being edited. By the time the 2026 midterms roll around, you can expect campaign ads that play Trump's own words about Biden falling asleep right next to footage of Trump doing the same thing. It's devastating because it's not an attack that requires explanation. You don't need a narrator to tell voters why it matters. You just play the clip. Trump's voice saying, "Nobody with true enthusiasm ever falls asleep." Cut to Trump with his eyes closed during a cabinet meeting. That's the whole ad. And it's impossible to defend against because Trump said it and Trump did it. This channel exists to make sure you have the context and the facts to answer those questions for yourself. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit that like button so more people see this kind of analysis. Because the mainstream coverage will move on, but the underlying reality that the oldest president in history is showing visible signs of fatigue during critical duties, that's not going away. But let's zoom out even further because this isn't just about Trump or Biden or partisan point scoring. This is about what we're willing to tolerate from our leaders and what standards we're willing to enforce. The presidency is an extraordinarily demanding job. It requires stamina, focus, the ability to process massive amounts of information under pressure, and the capacity to make high-stakes decisions on short notice. When presidents show signs they're struggling with those demands, it's not cruel to point it out. It's essential oversight. The person in that office has access to nuclear codes. They command the military. They shape economic policy that affects millions of lives. We should want them operating at full capacity. Trump recognized this when he was attacking Biden. He understood that voters care about whether their president can handle the job. He was right about that. The problem is, he was only willing to apply that standard to his opponent. Now that the same questions are being asked about him, he wants everyone to ignore what they're seeing on camera. He wants us to accept that closing your eyes for extended periods during official meetings is just listening attentively. That's not a reasonable ask. And voters who cared about Biden's fitness based on Trump's arguments should care equally about Trump's fitness based on the same evidence Trump claimed mattered. There's also a precedent issue here that doesn't get discussed enough. We're watching in real time what happens when someone ages visibly while holding the presidency. Reagan faced these questions in his second term. There were moments where aides had to work around his schedule because his sharpest hours were limited. There were concerns about how much he was delegating and whether he was fully engaged in key decisions. Those questions were valid then, and they're valid now. The difference is, Reagan's team managed it quietly. Trump's team can't do that because Trump won't stay off camera, and because Trump spent years telling everyone that any sign of aging is disqualifying. This is also happening while Trump is facing legal exposure on multiple fronts. The classified documents case is still active. The election interference cases are pending. The business fraud convictions are on appeal. Trump needs to be sharp to navigate those legal battles effectively. He needs to be fully engaged with his attorneys to make strategic decisions about testimony, evidence, and legal strategy. If he's struggling to stay awake during routine cabinet meetings, how confident can his legal team be that he's processing complex legal briefings? That's not a hypothetical concern. That's a practical question, with real consequences for whether Trump ends up criminally convicted or successfully fights off prosecution. Then there's the international dimension. Foreign leaders watch this stuff. They notice when an American president appears weakened or distracted. They adjust their behavior accordingly. If you're Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping and you're watching Trump fall asleep during public meetings, what does that tell you about his capacity to handle prolonged negotiations or sudden international crises? It signals vulnerability. It suggests there might be times of day or situations where Trump is less effective than he wants to project. And adversaries will absolutely exploit that if they perceive an opening. This isn't about being mean or ageist. This is about acknowledging reality. Every president ages in office. The job is brutal. It shows on everyone who holds it. But Trump made this about more than just aging. He made it about standards. He made it about whether someone showing signs of fatigue or confusion should be trusted with the presidency. He argued loudly and repeatedly that the answer is no. And now he's the one showing those signs. So the standard he demanded we apply to Biden must be applied to him. That's not partisan, that's consistency. Let me also address the media's role in all of this because it's worth examining. The coverage of Trump falling asleep has been more muted than the coverage of Biden's similar moments was. Part of that is Trump fatigue. He generates so much controversy that any single incident gets lost in the flood. Part of it is that conservative media outlets that hammered Biden relentlessly on this stuff are now defending Trump or ignoring it entirely. Fox News hasn't spent days analyzing Trump's alertness the way they did Biden's. That's not a surprise, but it is worth noting. The standards are not being applied evenly across the media landscape, but mainstream outlets did cover it. CNN ran segments. The Washington Post did analysis. The New York Times reported it. So it's not like this was buried, it's getting attention. The question is whether it gets sustained attention or whether it fades, because the news cycle moves on to whatever fresh controversy Trump generates next. And that's where we, as citizens, have to make a choice. Do we let this get memory hold? Do we accept that the person who made presidential fitness a central issue now gets a pass when he fails the test he created? Or do we hold him to his own standard? Now let's talk about what happens next. Because this isn't just about past hypocrisy or current embarrassment. This is about trajectory. Trump has nearly 3 more years left in this term. That's a long time for someone who's already 79 and showing signs of struggle to maintain the brutal pace of the presidency. If he's falling asleep in cabinet meetings now, in December 2025, less than a year into his second term, what does year 2 look like? Year 3? The pattern Biden followed was gradual decline that accelerated visibly in his final year. Trump seems to be starting from a higher baseline of energy, but the incidents are already stacking up. And unlike Biden, who had a team actively managing his public appearances and limiting his exposure, Trump resists that kind of handling. He wants to be on camera constantly. He does long rallies, he holds extended press conferences, he posts on Truth Social at all hours. That constant public presence means there will be more opportunities for moments like December 2nd and December 8th to happen again. And each time they do, the narrative gets stronger. It goes from Trump fell asleep once to Trump has a pattern of falling asleep to Trump can't stay awake during official duties to Trump is not fit to serve. That progression is how political careers end in the modern era. Not with one massive scandal, but with 1,000 cuts that build an undeniable perception. Biden's presidency effectively ended after that June debate. Not because of the debate itself, but because it confirmed what people had been noticing for months. All the little moments, the verbal stumbles, the confusion, the stiffness, suddenly snapped into focus as proof of decline. Trump is now at the beginning of that same process. The December incidents are the early warning signs. If they continue, if they accelerate, we could be looking at a situation where Trump faces serious pressure to resign, or where the 25th Amendment becomes an actual topic of conversation rather than a theoretical possibility. Republicans would have a much harder time defending that than Democrats did with Biden because Trump was so vicious in his attacks on Biden's fitness. Republican voters who cheered Trump calling Biden Sleepy Joe are not going to be enthusiastic about defending Trump doing the exact same thing. And Republican members of Congress who stayed quiet about Biden's decline are not going to want to be on record defending Trump's. The political calculation shifts when your own standard gets used against you. There's also the very real possibility that Trump doubles down rather than acknowledging any problem. That's his instinct. When faced with criticism, he escalates, he attacks, he denies. So instead of adjusting his schedule or being more careful about where cameras are during long meetings, he'll probably insist even more loudly that he's the healthiest president ever while continuing to appear tired on camera. And that disconnect between what he's claiming and what viewers can see will only make the narrative worse. It's the same trap Biden fell into. Denial works until it doesn't. And once the evidence is overwhelming, denial makes you look delusional rather than strong. Here's what bothers me most about this whole situation. It didn't have to be this way. If Trump had never made age and fitness a central issue, if he hadn't spent years mocking Biden for being old and tired, then his own moments of visible fatigue would be treated as normal human behavior for someone in their late 70s doing an incredibly demanding job. People would be more forgiving. There would be room for empathy. But Trump burned that possibility by weaponizing age against Biden. He made it a character issue. He made it a competence issue. He made it disqualifying. And now he's stuck with the standard he created. That's what happens when you tear down norms without thinking about whether you might need them later. Trump spent his entire political career attacking institutions, norms, and standards that protected politicians. He mocked the idea that presidents should be measured or careful or respectful of conventions. He prided himself on breaking every rule. And for a while, that worked. It let him dominate news cycles and energize his base. But one of the norms he destroyed was the idea that we shouldn't obsess over every physical sign of aging in our leaders. He made that acceptable, even encouraged, when the target was Biden. Now it's acceptable when the target is him. That's not unfair. That's cause and effect. We're also seeing what happens when someone stays in power past the point where they're operating at peak capacity. This isn't unique to Trump or Biden. This is a recurring problem in American politics. We've had presidents who were clearly diminished in their final years but stayed in office because we don't have good mechanisms for graceful exits. Reagan's final year raised questions. Eisenhower had a stroke while in office. Wilson was essentially incapacitated for the last year and a half of his presidency. The system allows for this because we're reluctant to force out elected leaders unless there's overwhelming proof they can no longer function. But maybe we need to rethink that reluctance when we're watching a president fall asleep during cabinet meetings. The 25th Amendment exists for situations where a president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office, but it's never been invoked against a sitting president's will. The bar for that is incredibly high. You need the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to declare the president incapable, and even then, the president can dispute it, and Congress has to decide. It's a nuclear option that nobody wants to use because it would create a constitutional crisis. But what if the alternative is a president who can't stay awake during critical meetings? At what point does avoiding a crisis become less important than acknowledging the reality in front of us? I don't have an answer to that question. I'm not sure anyone does. But the fact that we're even asking it about a president who's less than a year into his second term should tell you how serious this is. These aren't idle concerns. This isn't partisan fear-mongering. This is a documented pattern of behavior that raises legitimate questions about capacity and fitness. And those questions matter because the decisions made in the Oval Office affect all of us. We don't get to ignore warning signs just because it's uncomfortable to confront them. So here's where we are as of December 15th, 2025. We have a 79-year-old president who has now been caught on camera multiple times in a single week, appearing to fall asleep during official duties. We have that same president's past statements attacking his predecessor for doing the exact same thing. We have a White House that won't directly address what the cameras captured. We have a media landscape split between outlets covering it seriously and outlets pretending it's not happening. And we have a public that's left to decide whether this matters and what to do about it. I think it matters. I think it matters because Trump made it matter. I think it matters because the presidency is too important a job to be held by someone who can't stay awake during cabinet meetings. And I think it matters because we're watching the beginning of something that could define this entire second term. If Trump continues to show signs of aging and fatigue while insisting he's sharper than ever, we're headed for a credibility collapse. If Republican allies continue to defend behavior they condemned in Biden, voters will notice the hypocrisy. And if this pattern accelerates, we could be looking at a very different political landscape by the time the 2026 midterms arrive. This is the kind of story that deserves attention not because it's salacious or because it's fun to mock powerful people, but because it goes to the heart of how we govern ourselves. We're supposed to have leaders who are capable of doing the job. When they show signs they're struggling, we're supposed to be able to talk about that honestly. Trump made that impossible by turning every conversation about presidential fitness into a partisan weapon. Now he's reaping what he sowed. And all of us are stuck watching a 79-year-old man fight off sleep on camera while his defenders insist everything is fine. That's the reality. That's where we are. And it's only December. We've got a long way to go in this term. If you want to stay ahead of how this unfolds, make sure you're subscribed and that notification bell is on so you get alerts the moment we post. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this matters? Does Trump's age and visible fatigue disqualify him by his own standards? Let me know what you think. And if this analysis helped you cut through the noise, hit that like button. I'm Nathan Cross. This is American Daily News, and that's the situation.